Sabo that I realise I haven't even thought about.
Spidey senses.
Este hora feliz que me gustaría hablar del tema, which translates into English as
Spidey senses.
Everyone's agreed to drop everything because it's 3:10, and Kirk and Andy have declared that today's topic is
Spidey
Kirk
senses.
and Andy's hacking.
And Spidey senses. Yes, I am on.
Good afternoon and welcome to Kirk and Andy's Hacking Hour, blatantly ripping off Hamish and Andy's Happy Hour.
Absolutely so.
I'm Kirk.
Happy and hacking.
This is Andy.
So for those people who are here this morning, you would have seen a few hacky demos. Hopefully there was something new, something useful. We're going to do less hacky demos this afternoon and talk about how it is that you cannot have your stuff demoed as hacky things.
Cool.
Well, I think it's a pretty fair goal.
Yeah, bad English, but fair goal.
Well, no, that's cool, but it's good. So don't be up on here next year. So for those who weren't here this morning, clicky. Oh, really?
So don't be up on here next year, he said.
No. Woo. So it's the other way around. So I'd love to welcome Kirk Jackson, who used to be a developer and used to be able to write code. Now he's just the security officer for Xero.
And I'd love to welcome Andy Prow, who's a manager.
Thank you. Which... Okay. It's a good call, good call. Yeah, once many moons ago I used to be able to do useful things. Now I just kind of...
Also has a gigantic head.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so I guess, so it's funny, last week in Aussie, just about every joke we did pretty much went down the gutter pretty quickly. But we'll try and keep it a little more highbrow and smart this week. Now, of course, as I said this morning, so the Spider-Man is quite key. We will be trying to hone your Spidey senses today. Now, so before we continue though, we do have an organisation we'll be talking about. There's a bit of a case study during the session, do we not?
That's right. So it's always a little bit hard to get consent from companies to talk about security.
Yeah.
But we managed to convince some friends of ours in Wellington called Educa to use them as a bit of a case study. So we'll be using them as some examples of things to do well.
Absolutely.
Things they've done well. And so they're an online like childcare portfolio system. So say you've got your 3-year-old at daycare and the teachers are taking photos and writing up how your 3-year-old's doing. This is the kind of app that they'll use for that. And it's a pretty standard ASP.NET MVC app. It's running on Windows. It's running in Amazon Cloud.
But of course soon to be moving to the Azure Cloud.
Sure.
Obviously.
I guess now they have to.
Yes.
And it's running on SQL Server and there's mobile apps. So as Anthony was saying, we wanted to help you develop your Spidey senses. So previously when we've done talks, we've tried to teach you to be a hacker by talking about security issues that you might find. And today we're flipping it around. We're talking about weird little things that should make the back of your mind tingle a little bit and think, something's not quite right here. I think I need to call for help. Or something's not quite right here, I'm going to dig a little bit deeper. So those sort of Spidey senses.
Or maybe my vendor has just spent all my budget and delivered me something which really smells bad.
Yeah, so Spidey senses and bad smells. So here's a picture of a spider.
Which we thought was quite apt.
It's not Spider-Man. We actually saw a spider in Australia that was bloody huge.
In fact, it was this one, and I don't know if anyone knows how deadly this one is, but just you come out of the conference casino hotel where we're staying, walking along, it's on Broadbeach on the Gold Coast, and there's about 5 of these big buggers right at the side of the walkway you walk along. So, but the Aussies weren't scared, so we were fine. So I guess, so when we look at the Spidey senses, right, so what is it? So what is a Spidey sense? A vague sense that something is wrong, dangerous or suspicion. So it's coming back to the keynote, it's kind of that intuition kind of thing. A Spidey sense should trigger pretty much immediately and you kind of go, ooh, this site's doing something dodgy, yeah, hang on, this isn't right. So it should be pretty much straight away.
And you'll probably find that people that are good at hacking or maybe even good secure developers will kind of have good Spidey senses. So they'll be quite well tuned. They'll be using some other app in your organization and come over and say, hey, I'm just using the HR app and don't you think it's a little bit weird that ...
Absolutely.
And if you're a company trying to sell your product, you'll find that customers will just silently leave you if you trigger this sense in them. So if they're using your bank and and your internet banking site seems a bit shonky, they might switch banks.
Absolutely. Something just smells funny. So I guess it tells us. So we've got the Spidey senses, and we've also got this concept of the funny smells that we're going to run you through, right? So, so for those who don't know the OWASP top 10, anyone here heard of OWASP? Cool. The OWASP New Zealand conference is beautifully scheduled to be going on right now. How beautifully organised was
I guess
that?
you're not there.
Yeah, no, funny that. So it's training day today and then OWASP day tomorrow, so fair enough. But so that's the Open Web Application Security Project. And so the OWASP, we've got the OWASP top 10. So we think that maybe in a year's time, the OWASP might have the top 7 funny smells. We're going to see if we can actually get this as a global project. We'll see. If we do, you heard it here first. So
yeah, and I think it would be good to have a top something list that's got vomit and fish in it.
That's what we thought. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Cool. So what we've done is we've made this little cheat sheet. Feel free to grab one afterwards. They're on the front, or they'll be available for download on our site, hack-ed.com.
Check.
So don't stress too much during the talk. Which I'm sure you're not stressing anyway. TechEd's so relaxing. And what we've done is we've sort of categorised a bunch of bad smells or things that might trigger your Spidey senses into these categories. And we're going to use Spider-Man as a bit of an analogy. So Spider-Man is flying across the city.
Oh, is this my Spider-Man fly? So we didn't actually find like a Spider-Man outfit. But
isn't it underneath? Take off the shirt?
No, I'm not taking. No, that's I don't know what suit I've got on underneath this, but it's not Spider-Man.
It's like a hairy dog suit. So not that I've seen.
You've been what? Oh man, that's private.
We shouldn't share rooms.
No,
So Spider-Man's going through the city and he's smelt something bad, and this is what he's found. So the first category of smells, or the first category of senses, are the unlocked vault.
Absolutely. So this is indeed, you swing along, you're firing your Spidey stuff, swing in, and I guess it's kind of that. You go past the bank or the casino, because that's where we are, so we thought it was kind of relevant. And the point is that the vault's supposed to be locked. It's supposed to be where all the secret stuff's stored. That's where you're supposed to store all the really secret stuff, like the money. And so we thought, well, we could have called this one like smells of cash, but we thought the analogy instead is if you'd locked some fish in your vault, yes, no, work with me here. You've locked some fish in your vault, you shouldn't be able to smell it because your vault's secure. Aha. So if you go past the bank and can smell something fishy, it's because your vault's not locked.
This is the worst one we have.
Which is why we thought we'd start with that one.
Yeah, so
Okay.
your vault's not airtight.
So you've got a funny smell.
So it might tell you that there's some basic security that's completely missing.
Absolutely.
From this vault. Like they haven't even shut the door.
So as an example this morning, for anyone who was with the demos we were running for a special prize, and I'm really tempted
We
to
don't
give
have any
away
prizes.
that cool robot. Oh, have you guys seen like that attack droid robot thing
Don't
that
tell
you can
everyone,
win
they'll
from?
get jealous.
Where do you win that? Oh, okay. Anyway, there's one of the hub stands. They're giving away these awesome like remote control robot things. So anyway, we're not allowed to give that away. But so anyone this morning. So what would be a typical thing of where with one of the demos we showed, you would be secure, and then you might find it's just like pants down. What was the one we hopped from?
Passwords in the clear.
Passwords in the clear, possibly. What was the other one where we hopped from something to something else? Absolutely. So as a perfect example. Yeah, you're doing something over HTTPS, and then it drops to HTTP for a laugh, just for a little bit of time. That's exactly one of the perfect scenarios that you go,
It drops it to it for a laugh.
for a laugh.
Yeah.
It's like, I could have done HTTPS, but like, nah, forget it. Let's just do it over HTTP. Cool, fun.
So that's the first of our bad smells. So if you're using a website and you log in, it's HTTPS, but then the rest of the time you're using the site, it's HTTP. That typically means that your authentication cookies are going unencrypted over the network. So if anyone uses your site from TechEd Wi-Fi or, McDonald's Cafe or any other untrusted network, then just stop bringing up bloody Crew Lounge. If you access it from an unencrypted link. Okay. Next bad smell is a password field that limits the length or the characters. So the reason that this makes me suspicious is, why does it matter that my password has to be less than 12 characters? They're not storing my password in a 12-character wide database field, are they? Because if they are, that's bad, because they shouldn't be storing my password at all. They should be storing a hash of my password.
Absolutely. And all the ones that go, no, your password was too long. It was more than 12 characters. Like, ooh, really? Or no, don't put special characters in it. Okay.
Yeah, don't put percents in your password, 'cause that's not secure.
That's right, because we put the don't do percents in your password to fix our SQL injection problems. No, that would be the
Single
apostrophe.
quotes.
Yeah, exactly. I guess the missing HTTP headers. So we got some examples of these on the printouts if you're interested. But this would be again where for the cookie value, so HTTP only, so that it's not available in cross-site scripting. There's the secure flag that we'll show in a minute that you can use on some of the attributes coming across, things like the session token. So these are things that usually you'd have to look inside the requests to get the smell.
Yeah, I guess that is true. Like here, you'd have Internet Explorer developer tools open, and you'd see the traffic going past, and you'd see that the response from the server doesn't have strict transport security, doesn't have X-frame options, doesn't have what's the other one? Doesn't have the other one. And you go, that's a little bit weird. This is just a regular web page. They haven't done anything.
That's why you need a cheat sheet.
To tell.
So you could cheat.
It's not on there.
Oh, sure.
It's on the other cheat sheet.
Oh, okay.
Cool. So you can download those headers from our site. We did them in a talk a couple of years ago called Get a Header, I think, where we produced a list of security headers that you should use. Another thing that's a bit suspicious is when you see a website with robots.txt or sitemap.xml sitting in its root with directories that are blocked from crawling. So if you're telling Google, please don't crawl my admin directory, probably means that your admin directory is crawlable by Google.
That's kind of a please don't have a look at all my secret data.
So when you're evaluating an app or in your own app, if you find that you're hiding stuff by putting in your robots.txt, that's not a very good way to hide stuff. It's not really hiding it. Another thing that I've seen is people that deploy their sites just by copying a zip file to their web server and unzipping it. And when they extract the zip file, it's got the .svn directory or the .git directory, or I can't even remember what SourceSafe has, the .scc files or whatever in it. And there's some nice little open source projects that you can point at a website and they'll guess the names of the files in that directory and build up a list of the source code for your site, which is quite cool because not only do they get the current version of the website, they also get all the previous versions.
So it's almost like a form of backup, really.
Yeah. Back up your website
Exactly.
on the internet. And then the last thing you want to check when you're evaluating an app is whether stuff shows up in search engines that shouldn't.
So it's quite good. So if you haven't done like an in-URL on Google or Bing of your site, it's something you should do on a regular basis. So you'll frequently find that there might be, maybe you're using just raw GUIDs for files that have been downloaded, say copies of things that may have been printed off the site, or these sort of, email your invoice kind of thing. Well, these will often be the things that you will, those files in fact are accessible or from an unauthenticated perspective. It's just the GUID you put in the file name is the thing that's protecting it. And yet we've actually found quite a few cases now where they've somehow been actually mapped by Google. So whether it's now there's links in emails that are being siphoned off by Prism or wherever else that are ending up on Google by mistake. You've got quite a few of these.
The Ask Jeeves toolbar.
Exactly,
like
Ask
yeah.
Jeeves. So quite commonly you still find, even if, so maybe the files are accessible, maybe they're not, but at least the Google URL is available, and often it may contain a customer ID or it may contain, something that actually refers to the files itself.
So that's some examples of the unlocked vault smell.
So with our example, what is it that Educare did to protect themselves against such a thing?
What would they do?
What would they do? What did they do?
WWED. Should have got a tattoo. So they use HTTPS for their whole site and redirect, so that's just really easy to do. Make sure you don't have the actual site running on HTTP as well though, because maybe accidentally you'll redirect the users off to the HTTP one.
And I guess that's where, so if you look at the set cookie with the secure, so that was exactly the defense that you would have seen. So for the demo this morning of hopping HTTPS to HTTP, well, that was exactly the sort of thing that you want to put in there, that the website says, right, I'm not going to return you an ASPX auth cookie over HTTP. So when you do fire up your images or your CSS or various pages, it's not going to be as an authenticated user, or it won't be with this session. It's just going to be just like a get for the resource.
And then these days it's worth adding the strict transport security header. So what that does is it tells the browser to keep your site in a little database on the user's browser of sites never to go over HTTP to. So the first time they visit your site, so the first time they go to mysite.com, maybe they'll come over HTTP, but then we send them a header that says never ever come back over HTTP, and the browser will never do it again. And that's supported by Firefox and IE. And it's kind of a bit rudimentary in terms of user interface. So there's an example of what it looks like when you're looking up a site out of, I said IE, didn't I?
Oh, yes, you did.
Firefox and Chrome. Whatever, they're the same thing. So another example that Edge could do, so they don't limit password lengths or characters. So you might want to actually have an upper limit of a password, maybe 4,096 characters or something like that.
Yep.
But no limit that a user's really going to hit. And then they store it as a salted hash. So, I mean, pretty much you get this for free if you use ASP.NET's membership provider, that you're using a SHA hash with a random salt per password that's stored. Some people these days recommend using slightly stronger hash string algorithms like bcrypt or scrypt or that one beginning with PKS something. But as long as your database doesn't get stolen, SHA is pretty good.
Absolutely.
So that never happens to anyone, as we found out this morning.
So what's the next category of, so the next sort of smell that comes through, the next category. So this is where the site's now too trusting. So they've got some basic security in place, but it seems to be too trusting. So again, as my Spidey man, I can see that I swung down, I'm wearing my Spidey suit, I've got all my gadgets on me, and I walk into the bank or the casino, and the security guy's like, bro, and just lets me straight in.
Come in.
And I'm like, yeah, dude, that's a little too trusting. So if you trust me with too much stuff, what else can come on into this site?
The Auckland casino is much more trusting than the one in Australia where we stayed. Because the one in Australia, the security guard was standing there like this, and next to a sign that said, no rubber thongs after 6 p.m.
I know. We were quite...
Sounds really uncomfortable.
I know. Just think of the chafing. It's just like, I couldn't wear one till 6 p.m. anyway.
Yeah, whereas here, you can wear whatever underwear you
rubber
want.
thong all day.
Yeah.
Sweet as.
Something that smells too sweet, too easy, too nice for you, too welcoming. And that tells you that probably that the system's being a little bit too trusting of information that's coming into it. So some examples here are whether it locks you out if you enter your invalid password too many times. So I've put 10, but it could be any number, but it probably should, because if someone knows the username of a user on your site, you don't really want them to try every password in the dictionary until they get in.
And again, it comes down to the old debate, though, of not having your site vulnerable to a denial of service through having password lockouts. So that's another conversation on exactly the best way. So you really want to slow down the attacks as opposed to lock people out, because of course if you lock people out, then an attack can come through and lock everyone out. But that's a whole...
So you really want to slow them down to make
Absolutely.
it so it's not feasible to try a 400,000 word dictionary.
Changing passwords without putting in the existing password.
Oh, how many sites do you use where they say, please change your password and you don't need to enter your current password? So if you walk away from your computer at any time, anyone can go and set the password that they want for that website and then log in from a different computer.
Or if you're vulnerable to cross-site request forgery, where I can just do an attack payload that does it automatically. So,
so you should always be asked for your current password. And if you're doing that, just make sure you do the brute force checking on that one as well. So anytime that one of these characters gives you an error or displays funny, so the single quote, you'd normally, if you see that displaying funny, you'd be thinking, oh, that sounds like SQL injection. If you put a less than symbol in and it doesn't display out as a less than symbol, it just disappears, then there's a high chance that the site's got cross-site scripting. If you can put a smiley face in and bad things happen, that probably means they're not dealing with UTF. So maybe they're only dealing with A through Z US characters. And then those other two characters as well.
Yep.
So basically, if you find that the input's arbitrarily restricted, that's a bad sign. Sort of linked to that is the client-side validation. So some apps that I've reviewed will have in the JavaScript things to stop you entering these certain characters because their back-end breaks when they get entered.
and so we've actually seen an anti-XSS function in JavaScript on the page. It's like, hang on a mo. And so the JavaScript itself is actually checking to see if you're putting in script tags in your main sort of body of the text, which sounds like quite a interesting, using JavaScript to check for script attacks.
It does give you rapid feedback, but unfortunately JavaScript's optional. So if your server will accept the data, then it'll get through. So yeah, anything that's client-side only, you want to check that it's on the server as well. when the user's typing stuff and it's showing up straight away, so you're entering your address and it's showing up on a packing slip next to it, there's a high chance that there'll be reflected XXS because everyone seems to do that these days. If you ever see a URL with SQL in it, it's another good sign. That should probably be near the top of the list, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Kind of
don't see that everywhere, probably just occasionally. But when you do, it's a bad sign because it probably means they're taking it and running whatever's on the URL straight against the database.
So no CSRF tokens. So this is one that we do see a lot of, where there's no unique validation tokens per page, whether it's a page request token, CSRF token, whether it's
state or
absolutely. And so again, it's something that you should be able to apply across the whole site.
Yep. So if you've got your IE developer tools open, God, I hope there's a thing called IE developer tools. You've got your IE developer tools open and you're looking at the requests and the responses.
You see, this is a security officer now, and it's yeah. Sorry.
And you don't see anything random in your request when you save something. So you edit your first name and last name, and the only things that are being sent to the server are your first name and last name. Then the site's probably open to cross-site request forgery. So we'll give you some links to read up on that, but that's how you check. And then the last thing is if you see a website that takes other URLs on the query string. So, you know, login page has got a redirect URL. There's a page on the site that takes a URL in and then sends the user off to that place. That's a really easy phishing attack vector.
Absolutely. So again, so what would Educa do in these scenarios?
WWED. So they use the standard membership provider, so they get brute force protection for free. It's a little aggressive, probably, locks out the accounts, but you can say how many attempts you're allowed to do and what size window. And then you just got to make sure, or they had to make sure they did the same protection on their mobile API that the mobile app users they do on the web API. And that's something that I've seen, I guess you've probably seen it as well, is that when people build a mobile app, like, you know, what do you call it, Windows Phone, and it's talking to web services on their server, they don't think about the same kind of protections that their web app has to defend against.
Yeah, so we see a lot of,
Protection.
exactly that, we see a lot of queries going just over HTTP, and exactly the same, that the brute forcing tends to not exist at all because there's no clean capture functionality. So, yes.
Another thing they do is use an ORM. So these days, all the cool kids use ORMs. Yeah, no one said no. Cool. So everyone's feeling insecure now. So like Link to SQL, I think, is the cool one everyone uses at the moment, right? Entity Framework, Lightspeed, NHibernate. These kind of frameworks kind of abstract the developers from SQL queries a little bit and mean that SQL statements are less likely to be passed around in the URL, less likely to have SQL injection. It's still possible to do it, as we've shown in our talk this morning.
As we showed this morning. So, okay, so what's the next category? So we've currently got it now that you've got the security basics, starting at the ground level. Then your app was too trusting. It was taking too much stuff that it shouldn't have been doing. Wasn't doing the right validation of your input. So what's the next category? Now it's spilling the secrets out. There's stuff coming out of your app that you're really not expecting to see. And when you do see it, you're kind of going, yeah, I shouldn't be seeing this stuff. So what do we mean by that?
I think it was really good that we used this picture rather than the spill your guts thing we were going to use.
Yeah, well,
it's quite a big
true.
screen.
Yeah, it was kind of getting, censored and vetoed. So, so the actual smell, of course, had to be the smell of vomit. If you're spilling your guts, spilling your secrets. But no, you're right. A good.
So there's some sensitive information that's leaking out of the system that you can see, and you're like, why can I see this information? I'm just a user. Surely this should be kept securely on a server. So examples.
So I guess we've all seen a lot of the sign-ups and the password resets containing your old password. So that should be obviously a no-no in this day and age. That a password reset should of course just be here's a new reset token, go use it, as opposed to here is your old password.
Yeah, just think about how many people's inboxes on Gmail or Hotmail, what's it called, Office 365, have passwords and passwords and passwords from all of these crappy little web apps that they've used that have emailed them their password.
Absolutely.
Probably never been changed.
And there's some of the studies that have been done that suggest that a number of us only have 3 or 4 unique passwords anyway. There tends to be the work password, your banking password maybe, and then a lot of people just use the other password across the board. So when any of the major sites get hacked, if you look on Pastebin or other places, then you'll often find password databases now of email addresses and passwords that have been siphoned off, and it's amazing how often they can be reused across other sites. So it's stolen from a pizza site, but it's perfectly valid to get you into your TechEd site.
And the other reason that this is a bad smell is if they're sending me my password in plain text, it probably means they're storing it in plain text. Like, if they're going to send me my password when I've forgotten it, they must have it somewhere. So they haven't hashed it, they haven't salted it, and stored it in a one-way fashion. Likewise with the second bullet point, like if there's ever any part of the site that lets you see your password, that's a definite bad smell. Even if you're the admin for your, SaaS app and you can see your other users' passwords, that's also pretty dodgy. There's no reason why anyone needs to see anyone else's passwords.
Has to be said, and there's a lot of large organisations you can call up and go, oh, I've forgotten my password, and the help desk can just give it to you over the phone. It's like, no.
Awesome. We've already talked about sites listing characters that are banned because that's exposing how they're storing stuff in the back end. If you see a customer ID in the URL, so I'm customer 7. What happens if I change that to customer 6? Do I see their data? What happens if I change it to customer -1 or take off the customer ID? Do I get to see everyone's data? So they should know which customer I am because I'm logged in and my authentication context should let them know who I am.
Well,
so why are they putting it in URL?
So this direct object reference is one that we see particularly loads, and I guess Citibank were the first ones. Loads. So Citibank were the first ones over in the US to get hit by this, or made public back in 2011.
They weren't the first one, they were just recent.
They were just big news. And particularly the Citibank one was after you logged in, then on the banking page it showed your credit card, and with your credit card number in the URL it would show you your statement details. And some bright spark thought, well, what happens if I put in a different credit card? And so in essence it meant that anyone logged into Citibank could actually view anyone else's credit card statements just by modifying the credit card number. So that made the news quite massively in the US. But
yeah, and it's also quite handy if you want to back up your friend's credit card statements.
Very handy.
Yeah. I think that's one of the mega services actually.
The mega backup.
And then the last point here is if you can tell how a site's built, it's often a bad sign. So particularly if you can tell how the data is stored. So if you ever get an inkling that something's using LDAP to store its users because you see OU equals and some brackets, then that probably means you can fiddle with that stuff and maybe do some LDAP injection. Or if you can tell they're using a particular brand of SQL or even SQL at all, that probably means that you can see something that looks like a SQL statement. Or if you can tell that it's XML because there's XPath in the URL or whatever. So really, you shouldn't really be able to tell how the data is stored in your application. It should be a black box. There should be nothing exposed. And I guess similarly with the technology that it's using, like being able to tell whether it's web forms or MVC, that just gives a bit more information away to an attacker.
So I guess in a perfect world it shouldn't matter. So in a perfect world it shouldn't matter what technology you've used. You should be able to give the design of your whole app to the attackers. If you've written it securely, there shouldn't be a way in. However, we find on the whole that it's defense in depth. It's best to hide as much as you can just to not make the job as easy as possible.
So some examples of things that Educa did. So rather than emailing out the actual password, they emailed out a URL with a single-use token. So completely random, no one could ever guess it, and even if they did, it could only be used once. And so that means that if these are sitting in someone's mailbox, there's no value in them to an attacker. Cool, that was the only example I had.
That was the only example.
We had to trim some out. So the next category of smell is the back door is open smell.
Yes.
What would that smell like? That's
we
right.
took some time to answer this question.
Rubbish cans.
And garbage.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That was the smell of
Garbage.
back
Yeah. So
way.
you've been to the front of the casino, everything looks good from the outside, but when you go around the side, you notice that the back door is wedged open, even though it's a fire door. There's a rubbish bin sitting in front of it. There's a guy out there having a cigarette, and you could just sneak past him and get into the vault that way.
So what are some examples of what that might be then, Kirk?
Well, next slide. I thought you were going to ask me off the cuff.
No, we shouldn't.
So data not being encrypted, so over HTTP, like we talked about. if you see a menu that gets displayed differently depending on which role you're in, but maybe they don't actually check the roles again on the server when the URLs are typed in.
And I must admit, some of the worst ones we've seen of this are some of the rich client apps, like say a Flash app as an example, or could be a Silverlight app, where again it's actually the responsibility of the client to decide, will I show you the admin menu, will I let you edit those items? And if that's the case, then of course the server should also be checking who are you, what can you do.
Admin sites being open to the world. So this is normally a bad sign. Like if your site has a God mode or a super user mode, where when you log in to the same app your regular users use, you get all this extra functionality, then that just leaves you up to one programmer mistake, and that functionality could be exposed to the world. Whereas if you had two separate apps, one that's behind the corporate firewall, runs with a different database connection context, different rights to do stuff completely than the one that real users use, then the chances of that being hacked are lower.
So this last one, production data in a test environment, is probably the most common one we see. So I don't know for any of the devs out there, if you've ever taken production data and stuck it in a test system, maybe to bug fixing is a terrible one. So we've got a bug in the live app, so we'll just take a backup a prod, stick it in UAT, and away we go. Maybe you're testing some of the performance. Maybe you're actually writing code. The amount of organisations we find where dev laptops have got a copy of prod data. So again, this is where, well, that's fine, except you've got all of the security checks on your front door, but now your UAT, your test sites, and your laptops are sitting there still with exactly the same production data, same usernames, it's got plain text passwords, credit card details. Very common.
It really annoys me when I'm doing a sales call type thing where someone's trying to sell me a product, often security products, and they'll go, here, we'll show you our demo system. And they log in with what turns out to be a God login. It shows a list of all their other customers, and then they scroll past the names of all their other customers and click on one of them and go, I can show you this one. It's like, what? Why are you doing demo stuff on a system with real data in it? This is insane. So we have pretty strict rules about that where I work, so we never move production data out of that environment. So in terms of Educa, they don't have God mode within their application. They have a separate admin app, and they have to do the role checks both when they construct the menus to say, you know, an administrator can see the drop-down item for blah, and also remembering to do it on the actual URL that the menu takes you to, make sure there's a role check there, and then double checking that any of your AJAX calls and any of your other background calls that might happen while the page is rendering also have the same authorization checks. Because I find that the most common one is that there's just no authorization checks on pages at all.
Absolutely.
And the second most one is they've got an authorization check for the page, but not for the sub-page components like the graphs or the tables or whatever. Cool,
So,
next category of smells.
So the next category is the DIY stuff. Now this is an interesting image up there. So we asked this question in Aussie in what do you reckon this guy's doing? So some of the thoughts were he's kind of handcrafting a bullet. Any takers of what this guy's doing? He's putting on a door handle, exactly. So it's lying down. So I don't know if you saw that straight away. But no, so the Aussies were far more confident this was bullet making than door handles. They don't do as much DIY.
They're very terrorist worried over
exactly.
there. Yeah.
So I guess the smell that we put with DIY are some of the smells of oily rags. And so this is where some core security functionality, whether it's session management, whether it's the way that the authentication's happening, the way that encryption's being used, something has been homegrown, and it's pretty obvious that it was a bit of a roll your own.
In a bad way.
As opposed to a good one.
So some examples of this, an ASP.NET web app that doesn't use Forms Auth, that always makes me a little bit concerned. Like Forms Auth is nice and robust, it generates unpredictable cookies that are impossible to tamper with, not impossible, that are hard to tamper with unless you have the key to re-encrypt your own cookies and sign them. So why are they building their own? Another one is when there's a single sign-in, so you go to the login site and it bounces you to another site that has the main app, bounces you to another site. That doesn't come out of the box in ASP.NET, so they've probably had to build something themselves for that.
Very similar to, I guess, the HTTP, HTTPS example that we used earlier on in the demo. So one of the classic ones is when, as part of the handshake, so a form of, they're using maybe something like OAuth, but not. So again, for a single sign-on, an authentication token's being
OpenID.
created.
OpenID, not OAuth. Whatever, keep going.
Check. So an auth token is being created and is being passed around in either just HTTP between the apps. And in essence, what happens is that auth token is long-running. Once it's been authenticated, then it's not being destroyed or wiped out. And so you actually find that capturing these auth tokens over a period of time is quite an easy way to hop between the apps.
Yeah,
So
one
it's
app
very
that I
similar.
was reviewing had you clicked on the menu and there was a link to go to this other site, and when you clicked on it, it generated a one-time URL with a whole bunch of random stuff, so that when I went to the other site, it single signed me in.
Check.
And if I copied that URL, I could keep logging in as me forever, because it wasn't a one-time URL at all. It was actually just some blob of encrypted stuff that will always log you in.
So
That
talking
sort of stuff's quite common.
blob of encrypted stuff. So again, we've seen very common again where some home-built encryption is being used, and perhaps the encryption is using, say, AES, something you would expect to use properly. However, when it comes down to the randomness of the tokens that are being used for the encryption, so get the words out properly. So I guess the IV that you would use for the unique key, and also for the key itself, then that must be unique and random, either per session for the data that's being stored. When we find an app that, say, in the web config stores a crypto key that is the same all the time, and then the app itself is using that single key for all encryption in and out across the credit card data, perhaps it's across the usernames and passwords, or in fact the passwords that are now being encrypted on the way in and then decrypted on the way out. So that's where, although you'll be storing stuff encrypted, the app itself is completely vulnerable to attack because it is the one thing with a one static key.
And it's really hard to write your own encryption properly. It's actually even just hard enough to use Microsoft's decent encryption yourself. I like figuring out which algorithms you're supposed to use at what time and when you're supposed to do hashing and when you're supposed to do encryption. That's tough, but writing your own one is even worse. And Microsoft, I reckon, do a pretty good job of security, and they've got some pretty good encryption libraries. But even ASP.NET had the padding oracle attack, which was 2011, Christmas?
I think you're right.
Or maybe 2012. No, it can't have been 2012. It must have been 2011. So the padding oracle attack, where they use an encryption key which you can put in your web config, what's it called? Machine key. And they use that to encrypt the forms auth cookies. They also use it to do view state MAC checking. They also use it to generate the URLs for resources. So webresource.axt ? Encrypted blob of text. And because they were using the same encryption key for everything, it only took one of those things to have an issue, and you were able to derive the key from it. So that particular attack, you were able to just fiddle around with the thing that loaded JavaScript and eventually figure out the key that was used to encrypt authentication cookies. So that's actually now fixed. I think that was fixed in .NET 4, possibly 4.5. So now the encryption key that's used for each of those things is different. So yeah, don't create your own encryption and don't use the same key for everything. And we talked a bit about cookies as well. So if you see something that's got cookies that look a little bit strange, cookies that go on everything.com rather than just the particular site that you're using or the subdirectory of the site that you're using, then that means that that cookie could potentially be snapped up by other applications running on that domain. So things that Educa did, so they're just using existing features pretty much. So there's some things that you have to turn on yourself. You have to go and fiddle with the login timeout session settings. You have to change the default behavior of cookies in ASP.NET to add those flags on. You have to remember to abandon sessions when someone logs in. So this is kind of related to the session stuff that we showed earlier, where if I'm using your site unauthenticated and I get a session cookie, then I sign in and I keep using the same session cookie when I'm authenticated, anything that you store in that session on the server is potentially compromised because someone might have got the cookie before I logged in.
I think the HTTPS example is a perfect one. So again, from the demo that we showed before of when we just captured the session token before, so imagine that your site is now over HTTP and then it goes to an HTTPS login. So that's beautiful. So after you've logged in, say if you're using Forms Auth, the ASPX auth token was all over HTTPS. You never jump down to HTTP again. However, your session token over HTTPS will still be exactly the same as when it started life over HTTP. So again, if I've already snarfed your existing traffic over HTTP, I've already grabbed your session token, it doesn't matter that you've now gone to HTTPS. So if your site is now using session variables as part of your authorization that says session is admin equals true or user level equals 7. So that's the sort of thing that now what I've done is I've logged in as an underprivileged user as part of the website, so my auth token is valid, but what I now do is switch out your session token that I've snarfed before you logged in. So what it now means is I'm authenticated as me, but I'm authorized to do what Kirk's allowed to do in God mode. So that's one of these things that if you ever go from HTTP to HTTPS, then the session.abandon is absolutely something you should do to refresh so the session token is never displayed over HTTP. Something that we very rarely see though.
So it's a simple one-liner, you just do it in your login page. And then the last thing they do is they use ASP.NET membership, which as we've said is a nice model, and they have multiple tenants. They just separate them with different application IDs, which is a nice way to segment that data. Okay, second to last category of smell is the dodgy foundation. So Spider-Man's been swinging around the city, around this casino, hasn't spotted anything weird, but he's visiting his pal in the sewer.
Could be. Could be. I think that's where that one was going.
Gutterman. He's visiting Gutterman in the sewer. Enemy. And he notices that underneath the casino, the foundations are looking a bit crumbly.
So what are we meaning by so poor underlying architectural technology? So what are we looking at? So it appears to be a fairly new site. Maybe it's been updated, but it's been built on old technology. It's been built on a bunch of different technologies. So what are some of the examples that we have here? So
don't take offense on any of these. So if the app is a conglomeration of other applications, perhaps even of different vintages, then that's a bad sign because they probably had to glue them together. And the thing that people normally glue together is the authentication so that you can seamlessly move from one to the other. So in the old days, it used to be ASP sites that would transition to ASP.NET, and so they dumbed down the ASP.NET cookies to use the ASP ones. But these days it might be, third-party apps, might be, basically anytime there's lots of different types of apps, anytime there's a mixture of technologies. So similar reasons, like if a PHP site can use the same cookies that an ASP.NET site can use, I'd say that's a pretty bad sign. If you actually try and do that, it's really hard. So the chances that you've done that well are probably pretty low.
And it's particularly, I guess, when you see those third-party apps coming through, so whether it's a help application, whether it's a PDF rendering application, a spell checker. We found so many fully rich .NET sites that then suddenly have this PHP spell check app. And you kind of go, oh, what's that doing sitting there? But what they've had to do is now install an extra plugin that's running an administrator to be able to get the PHP running. It's
PHP on Windows, definite bad smell.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cross-domain JavaScript or CSS. So when you have your site on your SSL server, HTTPS, mysiteisawesome.com, but you're referencing Google Analytics from google.com and Bing Analytics from bing.com, and some heat map JavaScript user tracking evil software that the marketing department wants. Basically, you're trusting all of these sites not to send any bad JavaScript because only one line of JavaScript is needed to take over the user's session. So it's kind of lowest common denominator. Like your security has now dropped to the worst of all of these free things that you're using. And some of them are probably pretty good, but you have to trust them. You should be doing it consciously.
So we talked before about rich client components. So they are bad. And probably the worst thing is that just to make sure whatever, if you're writing a rich client app, whatever business rules you're implementing on the client can all be bypassed. Just using the simple request that we did before, where we're running it through a local proxy like Burp or whatever the attacker might be using. If you're writing a rich client app, every business rule, every authorization, am I allowed to see that data, am I allowed to do that change, must be replicated on the back end on the server. Otherwise it's a world of doom from Spider-Man's.
If they're using an old operating system, so if you notice that they're using Windows 2000 to serve up this website. Probably not a good sign. Windows ME would be a worse sign. But if they're using old IIS, if they're using old ASP.NET versions, it basically means they're not keeping up with the times, and there's a chance they're probably not patching either. It's just a bad smell. It doesn't necessarily mean they're bad. You can still patch those old, I don't think you can patch ME, but you can still patch Windows 2000 probably. Is that end of life? Whatever. If it's built using web forms, I actually treat that as a bad smell because that probably means that it started its development in 2001 because that was when web forms, 2000, 2001, something like that. It's kind of when web forms started. And so apps that are kind of started using web forms tend to be on older vintage, whereas newer apps, often people build them using MVC or some other technology. So you can kind of just tell when you view source. And the thing is with web forms is it's an awesome framework for rapidly building web apps, but it was built in simpler times. You know, that has almost no protection for cross-site scripting built in. The developer has to do it all themselves. So if it's web forms, it's just a lot harder to make it secure.
And I guess when we're talking about things writing directly to disk, so if you look at some of the demos that we did before on the XML file upload, so there's a number of variants on those. So we had the XML that was doing the XXE, so the external entity reference, so that was reading files as we uploaded. We had the XML parser doing the boom with a billion laughs as it was entity expansion. Another common one might be the zip file of doom, where the guys in the lab will often send through a zip file that is tiny, but its header refers to the fact that it's, say, a 3 terabyte zip file of zeros. So it's a tiny file, but as soon as it's received and as soon as the server starts unzipping, then it just unzips until it just, reduces all the space. So these are the things that anything you've got that appears to be doing physical file upload, physical file writes.
Yep.
Bad smell. And
writing to disk, so that how are they protecting this server from getting full? How are they protecting from viruses? What's stopping their admin from accidentally double-clicking on an exe in the upload directory? That sort of thing. So Educa, so I just wanted to show you an example of the number of different third-party things you could use. So this was just running Educa through my burp proxy. I think some of these are not actually from Educa, but it's using Google Analytics, it's using Intercom, it's using Typekit, it's using Pusher app, or whatever that is. It's some kind of drug dealing thing. Strange for a childcare system.
Yeah. You'd be surprised.
Intercom.io, I think I said that. So all of those things you're now trusting to run JavaScript inside your secure website. So you want to kind of consciously do that, not accidentally do that. And so if you're a security tester, that's the first thing you'll probably do is go run the website and see what all the things are that it trusts. You'll be surprised. We've already mentioned the Ajax post. There's a picture of my son. Isn't he cute? Yeah.
That's cute. That's Kirk's car.
Yeah,
that's cute
right.
as well.
Yeah, it's not as good as Nigel's Subaru. So this is just one of the features in Educa that lets you upload files. And so they're writing them to disk rather than storing them in a database or anywhere else. So that means that when someone downloads the file to view in their browser, if they're passing the file name in the URL, potentially you could escape out of the current directory by putting .. in the file name and maybe browse to other files, things like that. So you need to make sure that the lookup for the file in the directory is untamperable. So maybe store the actual file name in the database and just give people the ID and let the database translate it or some other way. Make sure that you're validating MIME types and content within the files. So we did a white paper on this. It's actually a ton of things you have to think about if you're dealing with files. And just about everything's a zip file, so Word documents and everything. Bloody nightmare.
It's the security approach is like, too hard, don't do that.
Too hard,
don't do that. It's
Your
just
users
insane.
they don't need to upload files.
No one needs to upload files these days.
No, ASCII art. They can just do ASCII art.
Yeah, that works.
Yeah.
I think it'll pick up. So the last smell that we got here is a risky business, and this is where the system that you're using, the app that you've written, the app that you bought, the app that you're using now, is doing something that is actually quite hard to do securely. So it's doing something risky. So there's something that's dangerous, but they've given it a go anyway. So is this security feature, so it requires strong security, has it been done securely enough? So what are some of the examples of the risky things that we see people doing on their sites all over the place.
Oh, wow, look at that first bullet point. Have we harped on about that already? I think we have.
Uploads.
Parsing, very hard to do parsing correctly. Credit card payments. Any application that accepts credit card details, it's like bad sign.
Absolutely.
Much easier to outsource that to DPS or someone else competent and just redirect off to their site. Let them handle all the PCI compliance and tokenization and all the other stuff.
Absolutely.
I don't even know what they do. They do lots of stuff.
What's scary is we've seen quite a few people who need to become PCI compliant accidentally. Say, for instance, so even like Zeroaway, you may store, you may choose to put your account name as your credit card number, because that makes sense. Why wouldn't I do that? So I might name my account for 999, blah, 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 blah. So what it suddenly means is that you don't choose to accept credit cards, but people choose to put their credit card as an account name. So does that mean you're storing credit card numbers or account names? And so under PCI standards, if you're storing all 16 digits of the card, then it's also relevant if you're storing the expiry date, if you're storing the name on the card. You never want to store the CV code or CVV code off the back. But we actually find quite a few people who accidentally suddenly find they are needing to become PCI compliant because their credit card numbers just appear.
Dope.
Dope.
And then the last example of something that I guess is risky, and it doesn't seem risky intuitively, but just based on my experience and Andy's team's experience, anything that's got a mobile app has probably got security issues. It's kind of depressing.
Too much. That's kind of a wide bore.
It's kind of depressing, but yeah.
Well, it's true. But so again, if you want to just give it a go yourself, if you're feeling a bit techie, then if you haven't installed something like Burp, do it. Set up, just get your phone to use your local Wi-Fi. So just set up, either use some on your Mac, some internet connection sharing. On your Windows, do the same. And if you just watch the traffic that comes through from the mobile device, whether it is your Windows phone, whether it's your Apple device, the amount of unencrypted traffic that flies through. Last year we did some demos on the UDID that comes from Apple devices, but it's not just that. There are authentication details that fly through, there's usage details that fly through, so just give it a go. So you see from the screenshot before, the URLs that were being hit from the website, you will see far, far more coming out from your mobile apps with the little app banner ads.
Yeah, that's freaky. If you're interested in reading more about mobile apps and stuff, troyhunt.com. There's a guy named after that website called Troy Hunt, and he did a talk at TechEd Australia that you can download, view online or whatever, where he talked about mobile apps. And of course, we talked about it last year, I think, or the year before, something like that.
And he has an insanely fast Nissan, doesn't he?
He does,
cars.
yeah.
Yeah, 0 to 60 in 2.7 seconds.
Yep,
That's
so
crazy.
you should trust him because he has a fast car.
Exactly.
Just like Vin Diesel. Okay, so that's the bad smell. So Spidey sensors should tingle when the lock on the vault is not shut. The door on the vault is not shut.
Exactly. In other words, it's missing some basic security.
The app's too trusting of input. It's spilling secrets out onto the pavement. There's garbage outside the back door and the door's open.
Exactly. There appears to be some roll your own crypto, roll your own session management. It's built on old stuff. Or they just appear to be doing something which needs solid security and it just doesn't appear to be so. So what we've done, we've related those through to the... Nope, we've related those through to the... Oh, look at that.
On the right-hand side.
On the right-hand side. So we've related those through to the current OWASP top 10. And so again, where the OWASP top 10 comes from, so you won't be able to see that at the back. That's absolutely fine because you're supposed to go to the www.owasp.org, look up the 2013 top 10. And so the fact is, though, the things in the top 10 are the things we've been talking about. It's all about cleaning your input. It's all about injection attacks. It's all about cross-site request forgery, direct object reference. It's all the subjects we talked about. This is what's in the OWASP top 10 today. It's been updated for 2013, and I guess the point is it's good to know what's the top 10. It's good to know in .NET or the software that you're using how to secure against them. But it's still key to that. What is that funny smell? What's that funny alert that sets off your sensors that these basics are not being followed?
So I would expect that every web developer should know the OWASP top 10 inside out, so that should be required reading. Because if you don't have a good handle on these 10 issues, then the next 3,000 security issues are going to be really hard for you to deal with.
Absolutely.
So have a look at those.
Because it is the top. 10. It's not the 10.
No, so this
That's
is-
a very good point. It's not the 10 security things.
So the
to
way
do.
they do this list is it's prevalence, so how often these things happen in big
Yep.
breaches, versus kind of like severity. So
And impact.
SQL
Yep.
injection impact is very high because you can snuff out the whole database. So we've printed out that with links to the top 10. We've got a little bit of information on our case study at the back. And we've got, that's good wrapping on the URL there.
Did you like that?
So on the aurainfosec.com site, we've got this white paper, and also our other talks are on hack-ed. So that's minus as in a dash, not as in hacking without education. We like to think there is education.
I think there is.
And so that's where you can find the other cheat sheets that we've talked about today. But we haven't really had a chance to talk today.
Well, no, we haven't really. We've been too busy presenting, mate. So
Must be time for some jazz talk.
I think
Hey,
jazz talk.
you know how we were in your hotel room last night after dark,
Oh, yeah.
and you left the room? I was really hungry, so I ate some of those cookies that were in the minibar,
Oh, yeah.
and
Where's this going?
I was thirsty, so I drank the water that was $10 a bottle.
Yeah. $10 water.
Yeah, so sorry about that.
That's okay, mate. So you know that turn down service that you had? Uh-huh. Yeah, that was expensive.
So we have a couple of minutes left for your conversation, if you have any questions. And feel free to yell them out now or just come up afterwards. So does
Yep, so we
anyone
got
feel game
so we're
to
3
yell
minutes,
anything up?
3 minutes away from afternoon tea. So if you want to snuff out and grab some afternoon tea nice and early, go for it. If not, we can either open the floor to questions or come and ask some questions. We have the handouts down the front. If you want to
Handouts
take
down
away
the front.
top
Cool.
10.